Good. So I think the question right out of the gate is um, ChatGPT, right? Obviously, all the rage. Um,
Right.
how is it going to? How do you think, from a technical perspective, and as someone who lives in the industry, understands machine learning and AI? How do you think it'll affect, change, or positively impact or negatively impact the life of a typical user, right? I think that there's obviously a lot of people that are excited about it from a technical perspective and the possibilities, whether it's writing code or writing content. Like I've used it for content. Seems to be good, but I'm assuming that there's a lot more. You live in the circles of the machine learning community, and you guys are probably, it's like that thing, the image of the caveman first getting fire. How many iterations down did he see a candle? Did he see a jet engine? You know what I mean? Like how
Yep.
far down did he see it? And so from a machine learning perspective, what's the community seeing right now with ChatGPT, and how's it going to impact us?
So no one actually knows what the ultimate impact will be, obviously, but we can take some educated guesses. Like Microsoft Build conference was this week, and they've announced that they're going to add it to pretty much everything. So Office, the whole entire suite, is going to have assistants powered by something like ChatGPT. So if you're writing an essay, you can turn it on and it'll give you suggestions, right? So it's kind of like Grammarly, but better than Grammarly because Grammarly is still kind of limited. And Grammarly is actually trying to use ChatGPT also. They're trying to integrate the newer machine learning models, the language models into their product. Google announced that they're adding it to everything and they're to Google Sheets, Google Docs. So everything Google is going to have Bard behind it or whatever version they have behind it. It's going to, so from that perspective, it's kind of like before computers, we used to write with a pen or a pencil on paper. And now most people type, I would say, 3/4 or 90% of the time. I feel like that's kind of what's going to happen is for kind of the everyday stuff. You're going to have this little assistant that's going to help you write stuff and complete sentences.
Okay. So, you know, maybe I know too much, but I'm getting a little bit nervous if the assistant that's going to guide me is, if it was trained on all the data in the universe, the assistance would be different than it was trained on a subset of data, right? So if the assistant only knows so much or has a very, very distinct bias, then the assistance I'm going to get is going to have that bias or be limited in that scope as well.
Right.
So what's the likely impact then? What's the outcome if this data that it's trained on, it has a bias or it's limited?
Right. So these models are only good at doing what it's seen before because it's essentially taking all the data, crunching it, and then getting really good at completing it based on what it's seen before. If you take an example like comedians, and we ask GPT, give me a joke, it does a terrible job. But if, let's say you're Jerry Seinfeld, and you say, okay, well, uh, I want to use machine learning models to write jokes for me. He could take all of his jokes, make a data set, and then fine tune it to his set of jokes. And then after some amount of training, it would probably be able to kind of generate ideas for him. but he would still have to go in and make that judgment. Like, okay, I want to make a joke about cars and the weather, right? Might be the prompt. And it would take all the content that he has. So like comedians in cars getting coffee, for example. Like you could take all of that content, feed it in, and it'll crunch through it. It'll learn what it needs to learn. But at the end of the day, Seinfeld has to go in and go, okay, I asked it for 10 different jokes. Which ones suck and which ones don't? Right. So then Jerry has to go and go, okay, the first three are just terrible. So he can mark them as terrible. He says, well, can number four, I could use with minor tweaking. So he might give it a 5 from 1 to 10. And let's say number 8 is good enough with just a minor tweaks. He might give it an 8. So over time, Jerry could create a model that's specific to what he wants, which is writing Seinfeld jokes. Right.
Okay. Now, in that example, I think we just got out of ChatGPT, right? We got into a new model, right? Which is trained by those jokes. So I have a couple of questions. What would happen if Jerry used ChatGPT to write Jerry Seinfeld jokes?
Mhm.
And then secondly, are there enough Jerry Seinfeld jokes to train a model? Don't you need billions and billions of records? And once you need billions of jokes?
So it used to be that that was the case, but there's a new paper out called LoRa, which is low. It's acronym, forget what it means exactly, but it's a method of taking a really tiny, small data set of like a couple hundred, feeding it through, and training it within a day or two, actually in a few hours, on just like consumer hardware. So your regular video card for playing games could do it.
Hmm.
So you don't need to run on the cloud in the data center and rent time from Azure to do it. So I think over time, as this gets better and better and better, open source is going to create tools for everyday average people to go and do this. And so if Seinfeld wanted one, he could find an open source person and say, hey, I want to build a joke writing model. Can you take this open source stuff, make a version for me that only I can use?
Hmm.
Whereas Seinfeld could use ChatGPT, but he needs to tell ChatGPT, don't use my data to retrain, so that if he pays for the OpenAI service, he can refine the model using their system and their infrastructure, and they'll make a version just for him that uses just his data. But
Okay,
they won't.
explain that a little bit. Yeah, go into that. So I was in the impression that ChatGPT didn't really use the responses and the answers that it generates to train itself, right? So explain that, how that partitioning and all that Jerry in this Jerry scenario.
So originally, when they launched it, it used all the data that people were using to create prompts, and then there was pushback from the community saying, "Hey, I'm using this, and you're taking all these sessions and you're using it." So when people spoke up, OpenAI said, "No, no, no. Going forward, we're going to ask you, can we use it? And if you say no, we won't use it." Um, and likely Microsoft will probably have to do the same thing, where they'll say, there's a service you can use. If it's Office, if it's Bing, they can ask you, hey, go to your settings. If you want us to use your data, check this. Or if you don't want us to use the data, uncheck it.
So in the Jerry Seinfeld scenario, the checked or unchecked version is, here are some, or maybe ChatGPT already has a repository of jokes. So Jerry goes in, he says, write me 3 jokes about cars in a Jerry Seinfeld manner,
Right.
or something. And so he gets 3 jokes spit out. in classic chat GPT format with the opening paragraph, a bottom paragraph, and the jokes in between and all that. And he says back in the chat, he says, no, these aren't very funny.
Yeah.
And chat GPT naturally would say, I apologize. Here are
Right.
more, right? In standard fashion. So you're saying in the unchecked universe, ChatGPT is learning. It's taking that and saying, those were not good Jerry Seinfeld jokes.
Right.
And it applies that to the database then?
Right. So they'll add that to their data set for training.
Okay.
Whereas if Jerry says, no, I don't want you to use it, but I'm gonna pay for a subscription and I want to fine tune it that's just for me. So then what OpenAI does is they'll save that in a separate kind of box that's just for Jerry, and they'll train a fine-tuned version that's just for Jerry. And only Jerry can access it.
So it's
But not
training just on that conversation or whatever, but also the results are saved in that box. So that improved model is not impacting the other chat GPT model or models.
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's a special version for Jerry Seinfeld. And so obviously you're gonna pay for that, right? Because it's not gonna be free. But the upside is that Jerry can use the same interface to like, okay, give it a ranking for each of the responses. He can add additional information to help it train better. He can explain why the joke was bad. Say, no, 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 your punchline was not good because you telegraphed it.
Hmm.
What I would do is I would do it this way. And so then all of that would go into refining the model. And then when you tell it, okay, now go and refine it, OpenAI schedules it, they'll train it, and when it's done, they'll send you an email or something and say, hey, we refined the model, give it a try again.
Got it. Last question for you then is how are you using chat GPT in an impactful way right now today?
So I'm mostly just looking into how can you get these large models smaller and smaller and smaller so that you can run it on a mobile device and not have it be really slow. Because like right now, if you go to ChatGPT and you start typing and you put in the prompt, you can see it slowly generate the response because these models are so big. And it takes hundreds of gigs of memories to run. But if you have an iPhone or Android phone or a tablet, you don't have that much memory. And to get it to run locally on the device, you're going to have to shrink those models down by 100 or 1,000 times.
Hmm.
Because like an iPhone, he has I think 8 gigs of memory total. And I think the next version, iPhone 15, is supposed to have a little more, but the primary limitation is the amount of memory mobile devices have. And so then the question is like, do you do some of the work on the mobile device and then send it to the cloud for the other stuff? Or is it just you just send it to the cloud? Which that's probably most likely the model because getting these large language models small enough to fit on a mobile device and run efficiently is a huge task, and no one's really figured it out. Like some people have gotten the llama models to run on a Raspberry Pi, but it's very, very slow. It's like you give it a prompt and it takes it 30 seconds or more to generate the prompt. You just see it like typing out the words one at a time. So obviously, like that's not really usable for an end user. Like a programmer is willing to put up with that. Give it a prompt, wait 30 seconds, respond again and wait 30 seconds. Whereas if someone's actually like out and about on their phone, they're like, hey, Siri, blah, 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 and it takes it 2 minutes to give a response, you're not going to be happy. Yeah.
So you don't think NVIDIA is going to make a mobile device anytime soon?
Well, no, so NVIDIA has these mobile cards for doing development, and I have one of them, the Jetson Nano cards that has a pretty powerful GPU on it. But even on that, it still runs very slow. And even that only has comes in like 2 or 3 flavors of different memory, like I think 4, 6, and 8 gigs of memory. And so again, the memory is a primary limitation of like you can't even load the model to do anything to begin with. So you have to the common technique is instead of using float numbers, you quantize it down to smaller to integer or short numbers. So from 16-bit down to 4-bit. And so that's how you shrink it down by 4 times. But then you lose out on performance and you lose out on accuracy and it doesn't work as well. But at the end of the day, though, if you wanted to run on a mobile device and run other stuff, it needs to get much, much smaller than that.
Well, I'm sure Jerry Seinfeld would appreciate if he could just, be backstage, talk into his phone really quick, give me 3 good Jerry Seinfeld jokes, and then he could go up on stage and maybe even read them off the screen. All right, good stuff. Once again, we'll hit up another topic in the future, I guess.
Sounds good.